The blast tore through Dust Creek like a hammer to glass. One moment the dusty main street was alive with traders, children, and the whistle of the afternoon train, and the next it was smoke, splintered wood, and the shrieks of people running for cover. Windows burst outward in showers of glittering shards, horses reared and screamed, and the smell of burning pitch rolled thick through the desert air. From the wreckage of a collapsed water tower came a voice, cracked and furious, calling for help. The town was not ready for war, but war had arrived anyway. Marshal Jackson Kane stood in the middle of that chaos, his long coat dark with dust, one hand steady on the iron at his hip. His jaw was square, his eyes narrow and cold. For a man haunted by nightmares, he looked impossibly still, like a tree that refused to bend in a storm. He had seen destruction before, fields set alight during the war, men screaming as shrapnel cut them down, but watching his town, the one he had sworn to protect, tear open in an instant burned deeper than any memory. His limp slowed him as he stepped forward, but he moved with a kind of relentless determination, as though nothing short of death could stop him from facing whoever had done this. He knew without asking who it was. Dust Creek had been waiting for them, dreading the day their boots struck the dirt. The Iron Vultures. A gang with a reputation for cruelty so ruthless it seemed carved into legend. At their head rode Silas Crow, a man who smiled only when another man was bleeding at his feet. The explosion had been their calling card, a promise that they were here to claim the town as their own. A hush fell when the riders appeared at the far end of the street, silhouettes against the settling smoke. Black hats. Rifles slung across their saddles. Horses slick with sweat and dust. Silas led them, tall in the saddle, silver revolvers glinting at his sides. His grin widened as he looked over the wreckage. "Well now," he called, his voice carrying through the smoke, smooth as oil and twice as poisonous, "Dust Creek looks prettier when it's on fire." Some townsfolk whimpered, others cursed under their breath. Jackson remained still, hand never leaving his gun. Silas's eyes found him instantly, and the outlaw's grin turned sharper. "Marshal Kane. I was wondering if you'd still be breathing. I've got to admit, I was hoping so. A game's only worth playing if there's someone on the other side." Jackson didn't answer. His silence was his power. Instead, he took 3 steps forward, boots crunching glass beneath them, until he stood in the center of the street. The smoke curled around him, painting him in grey shadows, but his voice came clear when he finally spoke. "You're not taking this town." Laughter rippled through the vultures. Silas chuckled low, shaking his head as though amused by a child. "Marshal, we're not here to take. We're here to collect. There's a shipment of gold coming through on that new rail line, and Dust Creek is the last station before it rolls east. You hand it over, and we'll leave you in one piece." The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke. People peered out from behind broken shutters, their faces pale with fear. The promise of gold, the certainty of blood. Jackson felt the weight of all their eyes pressing on his back, begging him not to surrender, begging him not to provoke. He remembered another set of eyes, his younger brother's, wide with pain in a prison camp as Jackson was dragged away, helpless. He had vowed he would never leave anyone behind again. His voice was low, steady. "There's no gold for you here." Silas's smile flickered, but only for a moment. Then he nudged his horse forward, slow, deliberate, until he and Jackson stood barely 20 paces apart. His men fanned out behind him, their laughter fading into the rasp of cocked rifles. "I like a man with courage," Silas said softly, "but courage makes for such a fine epitaph." The saloon doors creaked open on Jackson's left. Red Coyote Saloon, its windows cracked but still standing. Silas's men drifted toward it like wolves circling a lamb. Jackson's jaw tightened. If they took the saloon, they'd take the town in one night. He moved first, limping but fast, stepping onto the wooden porch with his hand raised. "We settle this inside. No stray bullets through children's windows." A murmur ran through the crowd. Silas's grin widened again, as though Jackson had just suggested his favorite game. "Inside it is," he said, swinging down from his horse. His spurs clinked against the boards as he followed the marshal through the swinging doors. The saloon smelled of smoke and whiskey, with a dozen broken bottles glinting across the floor. A piano stood silent in the corner, keys covered in dust. Jackson moved to the center of the room. Silas lingered by the bar, one finger trailing lazily along the wood. "What's the plan, Marshal?" Silas asked. "We drink and talk until you bore me, or we spill each other's blood on this floor." Jackson met his gaze without flinching. "I want you out of Dust Creek." Silas laughed and tossed back a shot of whiskey from a bottle he'd lifted without asking. You don't want much, do you? He waved his hand and his men poured in through the doors, the room filling with the stink of sweat and gun oil. The standoff cracked under its own weight. One of the bandits sneered at a barmaid cowering near the wall, and Jackson moved fast, too fast for a man with a limp. His fist smashed across the outlaw's jaw, sending him sprawling into a table. Chairs toppled. Shouts erupted. Then the whole saloon was fists, boots, and shattered glass. Jackson fought with the precision of a soldier, every blow efficient, brutal. A broken chair leg became a weapon in his hand, and when he swung it, bones cracked. But there were too many. A knee slammed into his ribs. A bottle exploded against his shoulder. His breath came hard, his vision blurred, but still he struck, driven by something deeper than survival. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for everyone outside, for every life the vultures thought they could crush. The fight slowed, silence creeping back in. Jackson, blood running from a cut above his brow, stood in the wreckage of overturned tables. Silas straightened his coat, brushing dust from his sleeves. His grin returned, wider than ever. From inside his coat he drew something long and black. A stick of dynamite. The fuse hung loose, unlit, for now. Silas held it up between two fingers, wagging it as if it were a toy. "You've got fight, Marshal," he said softly. "I admire that. But let's see how your courage holds when the whole building comes down around you." Jackson's chest heaved, his hand hovering near his revolver, but the dynamite shifted the balance of power entirely. The townsfolk outside waited in breathless silence, listening, knowing their lives hung on the next heartbeat. Silas struck a match, and the flame hissed toward the fuse. The hiss of the fuse cut through the silence like a rattlesnake in dry grass. Jackson's eyes locked on the tiny flame, every muscle in his body screaming to move, but the bandits around him raised their guns in unison. Silas's smirk deepened, savoring the power of a single spark. The marshal shifted his weight, gauging distance, breath, the curve of the outlaw's wrist. Then he lunged. His revolver barked once, the bullet tearing through the air and striking the bottle behind Silas. Whiskey burst in a spray, dousing the outlaw's hand, and the match sputtered out before it could kiss the fuse. Chaos erupted. A chair flew. Gunfire ripped the saloon apart, wood splintering as lead punched holes through walls. Jackson dropped behind the bar, loading as quickly as his battered hands allowed. Dust and gunpowder stung his throat. He rose, fired, dropped two men with precision honed on darker battlefields. Silas ducked, snarling, and bolted for the back door. Jackson gave chase, limping but relentless, the saloon collapsing into a whirlwind of fists, shots, and broken glass behind him. Outside, the night had swallowed Dust Creek whole. Fire from the earlier blast painted the street in orange light, smoke curling skyward like a funeral shroud. The vultures spilled out into the open, shouting orders, calling for their rifles. The townsfolk, driven by terror and fury, emerged from alleys with shotguns, pitchforks, whatever hands could hold. For the first time in years, Dust Creek's people stood shoulder to shoulder, united by survival. The air thundered with gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the dark like lightning, brief and blinding. Horses screamed and bolted as bullets tore through the street. Jackson barked orders, his voice sharp as steel. "Cover the windows. Push them toward the barricade." His commands gave the chaos form, and the townsfolk moved with desperate resolve. Barrels, wagons, and splintered planks became makeshift defenses. Each shot fired from behind them carried not just fear but defiance. Jackson's world narrowed to fragments, the heat of the revolver in his palm, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the dull ache of his old wound with every step. Yet within that storm, he felt something he had not in years, a sense of purpose burning fierce and clear. He was no longer the man haunted by his brother's dying gaze. He was the shield between his people and ruin. Silas moved like a shadow, weaving through the chaos, his twin revolvers blazing. He taunted the marshal with each shot, words sharp as his bullets. "You'll bury them all, Kane. Just like you buried your kin." The words pierced deeper than the lead. Jackson's jaw clenched, but his hands stayed steady. He fired, clipping the outlaw's coat, forcing him back toward the general store. The duel had begun, even as the wider battle raged. Explosions rattled the air. One of the townsfolk, a wiry man half drunk on courage and moonshine, hurled a stick of dynamite into a wagon loaded with stolen gunpowder. The blast tore through the street, hurling bodies and boards skyward in a roar that shook the earth. Dust rained down in choking clouds, and for a moment the fighting paused, every survivor staring at the burning crater left behind. Then the storm resumed. The vultures pressed harder, their numbers still overwhelming. But Dust Creek's defenders fought like cornered wolves. A boy no older than 15 reloaded for his father, trembling but refusing to run. An old rancher spat blood, raised his rifle, and laughed as he took another outlaw down. Their courage fed Jackson's own, each act a spark keeping the flame of resistance alive. Inside the shattered general store, Jackson and Silas faced each other at last. The walls groaned under fire outside, shelves toppled, lanterns shattered. Shadows stretched long in the flicker of flames licking through the doorway. Silas tilted his head, eyes glinting with malice. "This is where it ends, Marshal. Your town burns, your people die, and you'll join your brother in the dirt." Jackson said nothing. Words would not change the truth carved into his chest. Instead, he drew first, the crack of his revolver shattering the silence. Silas moved like a striking snake, the bullet grazing his arm as he fired back. The two men circled among the ruins, each shot close enough to taste the powder. Wood splinters cut their faces, sweat and blood mixing, but neither faltered. Their duel dissolved into raw violence. Silas lunged, slamming Jackson against the counter, knife flashing from his boot. The marshal grunted, forcing the blade away with both hands, his limp threatening to buckle his stance. Memories of his brother surged, chains, cries, the helpless rage. He would not fail again. With a roar, Jackson slammed Silas's hand against the counter, the knife clattering to the floor. Breathing ragged, Silas stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm. For a moment his grin returned, twisted and bitter. "Go on then, Kane. Do it. Kill me and prove you're just another butcher." The revolver in Jackson's grip trembled. He could end it now, finish the nightmare with a single pull. But in the faces of his people, he had seen what mattered, not vengeance, but survival. Slowly, he lowered the gun. "I'm not like you." The outlaw's grin collapsed into fury. He lunged for a hidden derringer at his belt, but Jackson's reflexes were faster. His revolver barked once, the shot clean through Silas's chest. The outlaw staggered, disbelief etched across his face, before crumpling among the ruins of shattered goods. Silence settled, heavy and final. Outside, the last of the vultures scattered, their courage broken with their leader's fall. Townsfolk whooped, cried, clung to one another. The fires still smoldered, bodies still lay in the dirt, but Dust Creek stood. The people had fought, and they had won. Jackson stepped into the street, revolver hanging limp at his side. The crowd parted for him, faces filled with gratitude and awe. He searched their eyes and found something he had not expected: faith. Not blind hope, but belief in a man who had stood when it mattered most. The marshal's chest rose and fell, weary but steady. The ghosts of his past had not vanished, but they no longer held him in chains. He had faced fire, loss, and temptation, and come through not as a perfect man but as one who refused to yield. Dust Creek had survived because he had chosen to stand. The night air cooled, carrying the smell of smoke and gunpowder across the desert. Jackson raised his gaze to the stars, bright above the ashes, and let the silence settle. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "A man ain't judged by the battles he's lost, but by the ones he still fights." If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.